It's not time.
They just lay there and just about to move.
I know you, my cat.
Yeah, no.
I see Dawn.
Good morning, and welcome to the March 12th, 2019 Historic Site Preservation Board meeting. May I have a roll call, please?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. Member Huff?
Present.
Member Marsh?
Here.
Member Kaiser? Here. Member Dixon?
Present.
Member Lavoie?
Here.
Member Hayes?
Here.
Member Burkett?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Before I ask the posting of the agenda, I'd just like to welcome a new board member, Kathryn Huff. Delighted to have her join the board. This is her first day. I see she has all of her work that she's been studying ahead of her, which there's a lot, we know. And then also welcome back Linda Dixon, who's been reappointed. So we greatly appreciate now having a full board again, which is really terrific. So now may I have the posting of the agenda, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, the agenda for this meeting was posted for public review at the City Hall Bulletin Board on the west side of the council chamber and at the Planning Department counter on Thursday, March 7th in accordance with state law.
Thank you. Board, I assume you've had a chance to review the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda that you would like to make? If not, do I have a motion to accept the agenda as posted?
Move to approve as posted.
Do I have a first and a second? The motion carries. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So, moving right along to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, this time has been set aside for members of the public to address the Historic Site Preservation Board on the agenda items of general interest within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Although the Historic Site Preservation Board values your comments pursuant to the Brown Act, it generally cannot take any action on items not listed on the posted agenda. There will be 3 minutes assigned for each speaker. Testimony for public hearings will be taken at the time of the hearing. So our first item is the election of officers. So I will turn that off to Flynn.
Did you want to see if there was anybody in the audience that wanted to speak at public comment?
Oh, I think we should do that. It's a good idea. It's a good way to start. Sliding right by that. Yes, any members of the audience, please come forward and state your name.
Good morning, board members. I'm Ron Marshall from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, and certainly I won't be making comment on it today, but thank you for considering the Kirshner nomination today. You also know that you have Inspiration Point and the Avery Field Cabin on your list to process eminently. I wanted to point out that likely this week, Palm Springs Preservation Foundation will be submitting the Kramer residence by James McNaughton, Desert Holly Historic District, Kirk Douglas residents, probably all within a week or two. And there are about 5 more in the hopper. And I bring this up, Flynn, primarily for management purposes. I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot coming, probably 2 or 3 times our normal production. So I know that Ken Line is the hardest working man in preservation, but he is only a man. And I also bring it up because many years ago, Patrick McGrew and Craig Ewing, then the director of planning, were having initial conversations about streamlining the process. And before Bill Lavoie gets too excited, I don't mean making the nominations shorter. I'm talking about the process of handling them. So I wanted to give you a heads up, and I'm happy to talk about some of those preliminary discussions that Craig and Patrick had those many years ago, which haven't been really relevant because I think you've done a great job processing these things in a timely fashion. But wanted to give you that heads up that there's a lot more coming.
We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Anyone else wishing to address the board at this time? Nope. Okay. If not, then I will move on to Flynn. Mr. Bagg, to please conduct the election of the officers.
Certainly. With our new appointment and reappointment, it's appropriate for us to go ahead and elect officers. The period of service will be from January until June 30th. And so this is a slightly shorter time period, at which point at the first meeting in July, we'll go ahead and elect officers again and get back to our regular schedule. What I will do is first request a nomination for the chair. We will vote on that item, and then secondly, we will take a nomination for vice chair. So let's go ahead and start. If I could have a nomination for the position of chair.
I would like to nominate Dick Burkett for chair, please.
Second.
Okay, we have a nomination and a second.
Who was the second? Was it Mr. Lavoie?
Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, let's go ahead and nominate on the motion that has been made, Mr. Dick Burkett as chair. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and it is unanimous. We didn't ask you if you concurred with that nomination. We will assume that you have. And next, could I have a nomination for the vice chair?
I would like to nominate Mr. Todd Hayes.
Second.
We have a nomination and a second. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote. All in favor of Mr. Hayes as vice chair?
Aye.
Any opposed? Todd, now's your chance. Seeing none, the voting is unanimous. And we have Mr. Burkett as chair and Mr. Hayes as vice chair. Congratulations to the both of you, and we appreciate your service.
Thank you. I would just like to say one thing, that I feel very honored and privileged to have been elected to do this. When it's done by your colleagues, it becomes really quite special. So I take this quite serious, and I really greatly appreciate this opportunity. And I'll do my best to serve the board to my highest ability. So I think now it's time to move on to the consent calendars. Item number 1 for the approval of the minutes, February 20th, 2019 HSPB meeting.
I move to accept the minutes.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
And
motion-
I would abstain.
Oh, thank you. Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Looks like the motion carries. So now we'll move on to public hearings. We do have one today. It's the application, it's on 2A on your agenda item. An application by Nancy and Stephen Cooper of Cobblewood Partners, LP owners, requesting Class 1 historic site designation of 417 Hermosa Place, the Walter Kirshner residence, AKA Casa Adair. Case HSBB number 112. Mr. Lyon, may I have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As noted, this is an application that's being brought forward by the property owner The report has been written by the Palm Springs Preservation on their behalf. Stephen Kalan was the author of the report for PSPF. As noted in your staff report and in the Historic Resources report, this residence was designed in 1936 in the Spanish colonial revival style, designed by the architectural firm of Brewster and Benedict. Kirshner owned the parcel from 1936 until 1938 and was the principal owner of Grace & Companies, a very successful national chain of women's apparel stores. Through his friendships with President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower, Kirshner worked to bring public awareness to the plight of the European Jews during World War II and the atrocities of the Holocaust. Kirshner was a very dynamic character, and there was a lot written in the Historic Resources report about him, as well as the extraordinary nature of this particular house. As you go into your staff report on pages 2 and 3, there are some photos during the 1940s, which we have identified as the period of significance for this project between the wars, and then current images of it as you see today. The building has gone through basically a number of owners. However, it's, as you all saw from the site visit that you took, it's quite an extraordinary property. And the most significant modification that was made to the home was in the 1980s, when there was a large addition placed mostly on the eastern half of the property, but there were also other things that have been done over the course of time to the home. The project has been evaluated against our new set of criteria that our new ordinance now lays out for us, and that is laid out on your staff reports beginning on page 5 through 7. And as you'll see there, and according to the report that we received from the applicant, they are asserting that the building is significant because of its association with persons who have made a significant contribution, because it reflects or exemplifies a particular period in state or local history. It embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, and it presents the work of a master builder or architect whose individual genius influenced his age. As you'll look at the analysis that we've done on the report, we have concurred with the Historic Resources report on all aspects except for the question of significant association with persons. And while this is probably cutting hairs a bit or splitting hairs, we went back to the National Trust in terms of the criteria that one looks at when considering a person of significance. And the guidelines at the state or at the national level suggest that when you look at a person of significance and his association or her association with a particular site, you're looking at that person's productive life, that period of their time when their actual contribution to either state, local, or national history was occurring. And as noted on page 8 of your staff report, Kirshner was already a very successful businessman by the time the Kirshner residence was constructed in 1937. And his association and his humanitarian work bringing the awareness to the plight of the European Jews was happening after World War II. And so while he was certainly a significant person and a very dynamic person, we have suggested that in our analysis that that's not a criteria that we would assert is a justification for recommendation on this property. However, as you will see both in the Historic Resources report and in my report on this, the property is extraordinary architecturally and in terms of what it represents in terms of the period of significance between the wars in Palm Springs. It was a period of when the many of the people from the Hollywood industry, from the movie industry, and other wealthy business people from around the country had really discovered Palm Springs as a vacation destination, and many of them began building second or third homes here in a very, very grand sort of way. And this home is certainly one of those types. As you go into the staff report on page 9, we've identified what we believe are the character-defining features of this property, as well as those that are non-contributing. When you look at the report that was prepared by Palm Springs Preservation Foundation, they did quite a good job of identifying those modifications and changes that have occurred. There's a number of very good photos that look at the property both during the 1940s, when it was owned by the Gibbs family, and then its current day configuration. So on the bottom of page 9 and on to page 10, are the listing of items that have been added to the home or modifications that have been made that we would assert do not contribute to its historic significance. They were either things that were done after the fact, or they were things that were not necessarily in keeping with the architectural character of the building. So in summary, we believe this is a project that is capable of being recommended to the City Council based on criteria 3, 4, and 5. We've also done the analysis on integrity, and the building overall has a very good level of integrity. There are some aspects of the design that we have suggested because of the nature of the additions that were made in the 1980s, that the design is really probably that portion of integrity that has perhaps suffered the most. But because the home has been in a number of owners who have taken extremely good care of it, most of the features of integrity in terms of material and workmanship and setting and feeling and association are intact. That concludes my staff report. I believe, are you speaking on behalf of this for PSBF? Do they have questions? No?
I certainly can.
Huh?
Either me or Eric.
Oh, okay. So members from the Palm Springs Preservation Foundation are here who can speak to this report. That concludes my staff report, and I'll answer any questions you may have before you open the public hearing.
Are there any questions?
Thank you. So page 9, number 3, where you talk about the expansive, lushly planted open space. So how will that play a part in its future protection? Like if somebody wants to plant something or add something, how does that one item protect or not protect, I guess is my question.
The notion of looking at open space in a property like this is about looking at how would additions impair or impact this building. Also, how would it happen if somebody were to, for example, decide they wanted to enclose some of those open covered terraces? We're recognizing that the landscaping has not been inventoried, so if one wanted to plant different types of things on the site, they could. The Historic Resources report identified that there were some changes that had been made when Kirshner was there. He apparently had a very extensive cactus garden on one side of the home. It's gone now. So the reason for bringing open space into the listing of defining characteristics is around the potential that additions could potentially, or infill could potentially impair the integrity of the house, not necessarily that someone might want to change the type of landscaping or add trees or subtract trees.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff?
Mr. Chair? I'm sorry.
No, I don't have any.
So that would prevent the site from being subdivided?
If the site were to be subdivided, it would still have to come before the board for consideration, and the resulting subdivided lots would have to conform. So the question on open space and whether a lot can be subdivided is still going to come back to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Just a follow-up on that. So can this be conditioned and passed by this board so that into the motion we include that the property cannot be subdivided?
You could make that as a recommendation within your conditions for your recommendation to City Council, yes.
We could?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions of staff? No? Board comments and discussion?
Mr. Chair, you would want to open it up for public hearing at this point.
Okay, I think he's going to do that second. Okay, so open up the.
I think your mic might be off also. I'm sorry to interrupt. Is your mic on?
Okay, so this time is, we'll open it up to the public hearing. If anyone would like to come forward and discuss the item, please do so now. Being no one coming up to the podium. So then, so we close the public hearing and adopt should have public, have comments from the board.
Yeah, at this point, Mr. Chair, the board should deliberate, and
Yeah,
then
right.
upon their completion of deliberation,
That's-
if a motion is ready, you could do so.
Okay, so now is our time to talk. Right, so board, please, comments. Ms.
I will
Dixon.
just say that it's an excellent report by the Palm Springs Foundation, and additionally by the staff. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
It's a new way of reading reports, and it's different.
Hopefully better.
Hopefully better. A little bit, have to get used to it, but
Yeah.
it's very clear and good, and thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
It was much better. It was more succinct. The initial report was a bit lengthy and convoluted, and perhaps provided too much information. This is one of those ones, I read the first report and was concerned about the integrity and the effects of the 80s edition. And then when I saw the property, I was just so overwhelmed what a beautiful piece of architecture and land that was. That maybe I overlooked the 80s stuff, but I'm happy that the report clearly points out those non-contributing elements, and I think that does so sufficiently that makes me comfortable with the nomination. Thank you.
Any other comments from Vincent?
Mr. Chair, only that it is an exceptional case report, and it's good that the character-defining features are separated out from non-contributory features for future reference in terms of certificate of appropriatenesses that may come in the future, that is delineated within the report. The site is exceptional, the building is exceptional, so I wholly support the nomination.
Linda? No?
There's no discussion.
Any other?
I think it's so wonderful the way that the people have maintained this property. They love this place, and you walk onto it and you feel that it's loved. And it's more than just bricks and mortar. It's like a living, breathing thing. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things about historic preservation, it's living today with the beautifully preserved past. And I think the Coopers really have done an excellent job. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I definitely support the nomination.
Good. Any other comments? Todd?
Sort of to pick up what Linda said, I don't know, I'm not quite sure how they would subdivide the lot. I don't know that that would be possible, but I certainly would like to do something to prevent that from happening. We did that before, where we had a quadruple lot that we specifically talked about maintaining the continuity of the 4 parcels. I think if that might add a little bit of added protection, it might be something that we might want to discuss. Again, just given how it's on the parcel, I think it'd be hard to subdivide without like taking the pool and a lot of other stuff away. So I'm not sure that it's really feasible or possible anyway, but I don't know if we want to add something to that effect.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if we're ready for a motion, I will make a motion and include that in my motion, that we recommend that the property not be subdivided.
That's great. Just see if there's any other comments from any other members. If not, then,
Okay.
You'll want a second.
pardon?
You'll want to ask for a second.
Oh, you're ready to make the motion?
Yes, my motion is
Yeah.
that we adopt the resolution and according to the staff report, and that we request that the property not be subdivided.
Okay. We have a first and a second. Take a vote.
Call those Call the vote.
Yes?
Call.
Call for the vote?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so there's no unfinished business today and no new business, so we'll now move into discussions. And the first item is 5A, the National Preservation Month Symposium. I guess that would be me. So I do have some handouts, which I'm going to start now. The first is just some general notes I'd like to share with everybody so that you can see that your subcommittee has not been asleep and what we've been doing. And then following that, this is the latest agenda for what's now our two-day event. And there's some particular things that I would like to highlight. And I will start with the notes first. There's three big things that I'm really excited about to share with you. First of all, our venue for the workshop day is, we're very fortunate to be able to make arrangements to have that at the bank at 383 South Palm Canyon, which I think is going to be really a terrific opportunity to experience this amazing property and what has been done with it. Secondly, on that second day, starting right out of the gate, we'll have Kathryn Huff, so her first assignment, and she's going to host that program for that day. She could do this in her sleep, I'm sure. She's so well versed in doing similar types of things. So, and I know she'll keep things moving along, and she'll make the introductions because we have quite a full day for that entire day. And then the third one is we also just made final arrangements that our after-event celebration is going to be at the Bougainvillea Room at Spencer's. That's the big news that I wanted to share with you. This has been on my agenda for the last 3 or 4 years, and we're finally able to make the arrangements just this past week. So those are three really big announcements. On the timelines, this is just to give you an idea of what's taking place to get this program up on its feet. I'm delighted to say that we definitely met our March 6th save the date, and it went out to all of last year's registrants. We give them a 48-hour courtesy. Well, this was a save the date. Then come March 18th, when the website's activated, we will give those registrants who attended last year, they are sent an e-blast giving them that 48-hour courtesy. And then right following that, be asking the organizations who have been our backbone in supporting us. All of the other 4 organizations in town have really made this event possible. And as you know, as you look in the program, you'll see that this year that there is even a deeper involvement by the organizations. Each one is sponsoring a tour, and they are also sponsoring a workshop presentation. So the whole idea is for this to be very inclusive of all of our organizations in the city and give them recognition. We will be certain to have their logos in the brochure and their names. They'll also be on the website by whatever it is they're sponsoring, and also up on the screen. So I cannot thank the organizations enough, because this is what's really made this event really work. We have some very interesting tours this year, which Dan Kaiser is going to take charge of. We actually have 11, and there is only one tour that's repeated, and even that has a twist to it. And that's the one at the Desert Star. But all of these others are actually tours that are new. And 3 of those tours are also projects that the 3 panelists have on the day of on our opening day event. So we've really got just great participation on this from the organizations and from the panelists as well. So, and then just to give you a little bit of an idea as to the brochure and the website for the look, Deborah and Richard Hubble, who are doing our production this year, have created a look, if you will, and I'll pass this around, but you can see that Preservation Matters, that's our branding that we sort of came up with last year, and this will be the front cover for anything that goes out on the website, as well as for the brochure. So I'll just pass this around for you all to take a look at. And I think everything else is self-explanatory. The only thing that could change, and it's not a matter of anything, it's just a matter of positioning on day 2. I would like to point out that Mr. Lavoie is going to do a presentation on architectural styles. And I love the add-on that he put onto this. There is more than modern. So that I'm sure not a surprise to any of us. But I think it's a good reminder that we are all-inclusive, this board, of all styles of architecture. So I am glad that we're having that opportunity to emphasize that. Also on one of the garden tours that Dan has arranged is also in the setting of that is in a Spanish colonial property. So we want to be sure, and then also Pearl McManus that Renee Brown will be talking about during the workshops, is another example of subjects other than just things that are modern. So that is my conclusion. I believe if any questions, we will also, by the way, the board will also, when it goes live, that will also receive a registration notice that you can register, because I know there's always been a question about the tours, and because usually many of these things book up very, very quickly after that first e-blast goes out, and then particularly when the organizations do it, so that you will have this opportunity as well. Any questions?
What?
Extra copy of this?
Pardon?
Is there an extra copy of this?
I believe there might be. What? Take mine. I don't need it anymore.
What time does day 2 start?
10 o'clock. And it's on the, it should be on the,
Oh, I didn't get this.
yeah.
I
but-
I
yeah,
just
it's
got
at
it now.
10,
Thank you.
because we have a lot of setup to do that morning. So that's when we're scheduled to do it. And it should roughly end, I would say, around 3:15, 3:20 is how we schedule. We'll break for lunch for about an hour and 15 minutes to give everybody a chance to have something to eat and then come back. Any questions? Yes, Todd.
So I have a short prepared statement I'd like to read with respect to something that happened in regards to this a while back. The Brown Act was enacted because local government bodies were avoiding public scrutiny by holding secret workshops and study sessions. People were doing things to suit their own agenda. When people or government bodies don't do things in the open, it taints the process and calls into question what gets done and what that body stands for. What we stand for is important to me. What we do on this board is important to me. Transparency is important to me. I don't want the validity of what we do called into question because of improper protocol. Secret ballots, in my opinion, are expressly prohibited by the Brown Act because the public has a right to scrutinize and participate in public hearings and witness the decision-making process. If votes are cast in secret, it deprives people of a portion of their rights. This particular secret ballot also cut the majority of this board out of that part of the process. We all deserve a voice in the process. Our ability to discuss and debate in open forum brings credibility. Open discussion also helps to achieve one of the main goals of this body, which is to educate. The denial of open forums for communication and debate is one of the very reasons the Brown Act was put into place. I encourage this body to respect the essence of the Brown Act and also our goal to educate and cure and correct the action that was taken and have an open discussion about what was on that secret ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Any comments from anybody? Or Glenn? No. Glenn?
What Todd is referring to is the awards that we are discussing for the symposium to be presented at the symposium. Because the awards are neither an entitlement or a legislative action, they would not be subject to the Brown Act. But I think going to what Mr. Hayes is saying is he would prefer to discuss these in the open rather than via a survey.
Right. Okay. Any other?
How do we do that?
Yeah, how do we move forward? I mean, he's got a valid point. Are we going to discuss it? Does it have to be put on our agenda? What's?
It's already on your agenda under the symposium, so we could discuss that now if you would like.
Okay. Okay, so we'll open for discussion. Any?
So, excuse me, can the staff brief us again on the nominations and what we voted on?
Certainly.
And redo the vote, please.
Yep, certainly. There were 5 things that we were looking at in terms of awards. And let me start first with properties, Class 1 designated properties. We had 3 that were designated over the past year, and the question was, should we present awards to one or more of those properties to recognize them as part of the symposium? The 3 properties were the Hugh Capture House in Deepwell, and I forget the name of it. The Macy residence, or it also has another name.
No, it was.
That's what we're calling it, the Macy residence.
Okay. The second was the William Holden Deepwell House. And then the third was the Oasis property. And so those were the 3 that had received Class 1 designation. Now, the Oasis property is a little bit different in that it was a revision to its existing Class 1 designation. And so that was a little bit different than the other 2. But the sentiment of the board, if I remember correctly, was that there were concerns about the characteristics of each of those properties, and it was uncertain whether we should recognize any of them at the symposium. And so if there's any additional thoughts on those 3 properties and whether or not they should receive recognition at the symposium, now would be the time to offer those comments.
Right. So I guess it's my feeling on both of those that we are the Historic Site Preservation Board, not the Historic Site Renovation Board. And I think that the word preservation basically is defined as either keeping the same as or taking back to the way it was. And I personally don't think that either one of those, out of the thousands and thousands of properties that are in the city of Palm Springs, are an exemplary example, or are a, you know, a great example of either a property being brought back to or being maintained in its original state. And I think we just need to be careful that we focus on the preservation aspect of why we're here, and that's all I have to say.
I'd just like to say one thing about that, and I appreciate very much, Todd, what you're saying. I think also that we might want to look at, if we designate a property, that I would hope that it would be worthy of, you know, of that designation. Otherwise, it shouldn't probably be designated. And so it just seems like that sort of going back and revisiting something at a later point. So it is a delicate balance, and I think that we certainly need to reach the highest level that we can for preservation. I agree with you that 100%. I would just like to, so I think this is just a good reminder. I'm glad you brought it up. I think it's a good reminder that when we're making a designation, to me, that should, the whole idea behind just acknowledging a certificate of recognition is just simply that, you know, the property owners receive a plaque, and that goes, you know, that goes on their property. But this is just like a public recognition. So I just think going forward, this will be a good trigger for us. I agree that to be very, very careful about our designations, and that would sort of automatically be considered that it would be honored at our annual event, just recognizing I think it's important that we highlight these property owners for designating their properties. That was the whole idea. So hopefully we can just be very careful, and I think it's good that you brought this up because it does need a little soul searching. So I think it'll help us going forward.
Mr. Chair, I think while the Preservation Committee preserves properties, I think that there are higher and lower standards that we use when we do things. And I think that recognizing the properties by mention is really great. I think people in our community should know who did what they did and that they've become class ones. However, to receive an award, for me, an award is for something that's truly outstanding. And I think that we have to be very, very selective when we give an award.
Right. So, and I think because there was some not 100% concurrence, that decided it's best just not to mention any of those this particular year. So that, I think that's that was the best of the options.
And one of the things, Mr. Chair, if I could just jump in, you do have on your program that we'll be talking about the accomplishments of the Historic Site Preservation Board and staff over the past year, and that's where you can identify the ones that received Class 1 nomination.
Yeah. So we'll just make a mention. We won't be like giving them more. Just shows what we actually did. That was the whole idea on that one. Okay, so I think this is good. Bill.
I agree with Linda. We had huge issues with integrity on both of these projects, and they do not represent what they look like or their prime period of significance. And something needs to be said about, yeah, they are renovations. They are not restorations. They are not preserving what was good about them. So I'm happy to see that they didn't make the cut, but they should be mentioned. All of the nominations should be mentioned as part of the work we do and the recognition.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think all of these properties that we recommended are very important to our community. And I love the fact that they're protected and they're going to be here forever. But that being said, are they so outstanding that they should get an award?
Right.
You know,
Well, I think,
that's where this board has to really look and make a decision.
right. So I think this is good for us for next year. I'm really glad this came up because in planning, this needs to be, we'll take this into consideration, I can guarantee you, for certain, going forward. So do we, be appropriate for us to take a vote on?
Are we going to discuss the second part of it?
Let's go ahead and talk about let's go ahead and talk about the properties first, and then we can talk about, I'll ask Mr. Chair if you would discuss the individuals for recognition this year separately after we discuss the properties for recognition.
So I'm sorry, what was discussed?
So the board would like to take a vote in terms of recognizing properties. And so if someone would like to form a motion.
Right. Do I have a motion, Tim?
Well, I guess my motion would be that we make mention of all of the properties that this board has moved forward this past year without actually awarding anything to anybody.
Okay.
Is that?
Second.
So we have
Second.
so we have a first and a second. Mr. Marsh is second. Okay, so we have a first and a second, and so the motion carries.
All in favor?
Oh, yeah, all in favor, yeah.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. I'll get the gist of this. Just give me one more meeting.
Are there any opposed to that motion?
Yeah. Anyone opposed?
Seeing none, the motion
Being
carries.
none, the motion carries. Thank you very much. So, very healthy. I think that's good.
Okay, and then, Mr. Chair, if you would like to discuss the individuals for recognition.
We can, the two
Yes.
nominations that we have, we can do that. So if you would like me to explain who those two people are? Okay. I guess this is, and I don't know if there's a good way to do this going forward, because I certainly understand what Todd has brought up, and I want to be very respectful of that. But we've always tried, the idea with the awards, if we're going to give them, is that there be a surprise element to the public when the awards, on the day of the awards. And, but I think under the circumstances, we should go ahead and talk about it. So the Legacy Award, and going back to the poll that was unanimous, was basically for Mr. Chapter to receive the Legacy Award. And the Preservation Matters of the Year, the most votes were for Mr. Johns, with Gary Johns. So those were the two awards. So any?
Yes, I have a question. Have you established a criteria for reviewing the awards? Do you have a criteria to determine who could receive those awards?
I think, yeah, not a formalized criteria.
Okay.
Basically, what's happened in the past is the subcommittee makes recommendations to the board, and then the board votes on it's the board's vote, not just the subcommittee. We're just the recommending body actually for that, and it really it's a matter. It's as to the record, I think, of what the individuals have brought to the table. Also, we have done just properties before rather than individuals. And maybe this is a good time to discuss that as well. Do we want to just keep it to properties?
Or perhaps next year
Yeah.
can establish criteria, and you might
Right.
do one for individual and one for property.
Right.
Or something
Right.
like that, but maybe
Yeah.
a more formal criteria
Yeah.
that takes in
And-
conservation and preservation.
Right, and maybe we don't want awards, so I think that that's all optional. I mean, this is the board's decision as when it comes to this.
Mr.
Let me,
Chair?
oh, sorry, go ahead.
So, who has received the legacy awards in the past? I mean, what are the criteria for the legacy award?
See, the only one that we've given in the past was last year, and that was to Tracy Conrad for the Willows property. That was a Preservation Legacy Award that we gave.
Right.
Unlike the Oscars, we can be a little bit more flexible in terms of the awards. I think one of the key things to keep in mind is that there are different things occurring from year to year that may not be consistent that we want to recognize every year. For example, this year, in terms of the Class 1 properties, you've chosen not to recognize any of them for an award per se. In other years, you might have 4 or 5. And so I think it's important to be flexible in terms of the consideration of the recognition that you give at the annual symposium based on what has happened during the past year. And again, the role of the board is education, and by pointing out good examples or those who have dedicated their lives to preservation efforts, I think that's part of the education process. But again, I would just encourage the board to be flexible in terms of what you may recognize every year to give yourself that option.
Yes,
Mr. Chair.
Ken?
Okay, I understand Preservation Matters Award because that person has dedicated their life to preservation and contributed greatly to what this board is and how it operates. But the fact that an architect has outlived his peers, has a great body of work, I don't know what he's done for preservation. I don't. So that one is a question to me.
Right.
Why is this person receiving a legacy award? Other than he's done great work, but has that work been in preservation? Or is it just in the practice of architecture that's preservable?
Yes, Mr. Klein.
One thing I might just point out, when the symposiums first were being put together, these emerged as a way of recognizing. The word award was not attached to them. They were certificates of recognition, and they were recognizing things that different property owners had done in the name of preservation that the board felt were exemplary actions. So I think it's good that you have these debates, but I think that I think it's good to look at the distinction between an award, which does have this sort of sense like prize, versus having this public forum, which is the only real formal public forum other than your meetings that you have every month, at which you can recognize things that have happened in the community. So I would just put that out there for thought as you go forward for next year, that maybe these aren't awards. Maybe these go back to the notion that you're simply, in the moment of that symposium, bringing up a couple of examples of things that you recognize were good things that were done in preservation. It's just a thought.
And I think maybe also going forward, we should have this discussion very, very early in the game, maybe. I mean, it's been on the agenda for how many, from September, but now I think we're getting into sort of the meat of things, and so we can decide as a board, again, if we shouldn't have awards. And I think Ken's right. I think it's the word award that is also maybe not necessarily a good idea. That sort of has a connotation maybe that sort of taints it maybe in a way.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'm probably going to try to get you off the hook. I move that we issue a certificate of recognition to Hugh Capter for creating a body of work that is worthy of preservation.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. May I have I'm sorry, Bill, could you finish the motion again, please?
I wrote it down.
Okay.
I move that we, in the symposium, issue a certificate of recognition to Hugh Capter for creating a body of work that is worthy of preservation.
So a certificate of recognition is what we're really saying, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Is
I
that-
seconded the
And you
motion.
seconded, so that seems to be, okay, any other questions you'd like to bring up?
Not a question, just a comment. So I think the reason why I'm so concerned about us having this debate, partly and mostly because of the opportunity to educate the people who might be watching, that we can now talk about the amazing body of work and what Hugh has done to contribute to Palm Springs. And without this discussion, without this debate, we miss an opportunity to educate the people of Palm Springs why Hugh's done this body of work. And so, you know, I think he warrants and has earned this recognition. And I think, you know, I'd like to discuss it. You know, and I think we obviously should discuss it at the program. But this gives us yet one more record where we can talk about it and sort of extol the virtues of what this man has done to contribute to Palm Springs. And that's, I think, why I'm wanting to have discussions like this.
Right.
So.
No, I agree. I think it's a healthy thing that we do this. It's what's going to make us grow. It's what's going to make us more solid, I think, going forward. And setting examples, basically. Any other comments?
Call for the vote.
So it's time, I think, that we call for the vote. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So the motion carries. So,
Just a comment, it is a year of recognition for Hugh Capner in that, you know, there's a major exhibit of his work. There are other accolades that he is getting at the present time, so it's finally coming to realize that he's a significant living architect of the modern period in Palm Springs, and it contributes to another step in recognition of his body of work in this area.
thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I think not. I think we'll move on to 5B, the Cornelia White.
Mr. Chair, we're not done yet. I'd make a motion that we issue a certificate of recognition under the heading of Preservation Matters to Gary Johns for his notable contribution to the preservation effort and the life and vitality of this preservation board here in Palm Springs.
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Any questions? I'm calling for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? No? The motion carries. Okay, so now moving on to 5B, the Cornelia White Resident Stabilization. Mr. Lyons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a brief summary. I've tried to bring to you in the past few months what's going on over at Cornelia White. The project has had a bit of a few challenges, dealing with a building that's built out of railroad ties, like a log cabin that's been watered by the irrigation system for a few decades. It's turned into quite a mess. So here's the house as it stands today. These are pictures that I took yesterday. The exterior board and batten siding was removed off the back of the house. The back of the house, as you may recall, was an addition done about 1914. And they believed at the time that they were surveying it that it was a standard stud frame construction, but they found that once they got inside, it was just some furring strips that were holding the board and batten together. This is the east facade. There you can see some of the severe deterioration that's happened on the railroad ties along the belt courses. And you'll see a picture of this on the inside as well. In speaking with the people from D.W. Johnston yesterday, some of these pieces are going to actually have to be fully replaced, and they will be doing the best they can to replicate these with the same rough sawn and distressed character that the railroad ties had when they were installed. This is an example of an area where the board, where the actual railroad ties have been laid vertically. Where the person's finger is where the batten strips were laid over them. So each one of the railroad ties where they were laid vertically did have a batten strip over the joint, and it was at those locations that there was also a lot of water infiltration. The picture on the right is the result of good intentions that went bad. When the city's been trying to maintain this over the past few decades, they've been trying to carefully caulk everything. And what happened here is they caulked the bottom joint where the railroad ties abut the belt course. And what that effectively did was to trap the water inside the wood, and it continued to rot the bottom of those railroad ties out. So when this goes back in and is repaired, the caulk joint will not be installed along that bottom edge, but rather there'll be flashing that will be put in that will help weep the moisture that does get into the wall out of the wall without damaging the wood. This is a look of the interior. The picture on the left is the living room. There you see the fireplace on the left, and the floorboards have been pulled up there in a portion of it. The middle photo, of course, is the kitchen, and the picture on the left is, I believe, the dining room, if I'm not mistaken. They've been pulling up the floor in sections. I believe it's oak or maple that you're seeing in those 1x3 strips or 3/4 by 3 strips are not original to the home, but were probably installed sometime in the 40s or 50s is what we believe. So once those are removed, this is the condition underneath the floor. There you can see the old ductwork that's been installed, probably I think by the city in the 70s or 80s when the property was relocated to the Village Green in 1979. Obviously, when this home was built in the 1890s, it did not have subfloor air conditioning, but as a museum, the climate control was a necessary addition. And so the air conditioning systems will be cleaned up, and it will continue to have climate control once the building is put back together. On the picture on the right, you see where some of the floorboards have been pulled back, and you're seeing some of the original floor structure, many of which were simply 4x4s laid on various types of stands and supports. Here you see the new framing going back in. There you can see that there's a plywood sheathing that's going down, and then those individual hardwood boards that you saw in the previous photo will be laid over the top of that. In the far back, you can see on the picture on the left, the windows have been pulled. The contractor has been beginning to rebuild those wooden window sashes, and some of those are now on the site as well. This is the condition at the east corner. When I showed you that other picture previously of the very deteriorated belt courses, this is the inside of that. You can see toward the top of the picture on the left, those two sort of white lines. That's actually daylight coming through between the railroad ties. The picture on the right gives you some idea of what's holding this thing up. And it's a series of trailer jacks, concrete blocks, and blocks of wood set just on the soil. And that's part of why we've been having problems with the thing settling differentially. Here you see a condition looking from the inside out. This gives you some idea on the degree of deterioration that's occurred on these railroad ties. The pictures on the left is, again, that belt course that you saw on the east facade, the same as the one in the middle. And then the one on the far right, if you think about what would be the northwest corner of the house, it is a small 45-degree angle on it, and that is that angled corner right there that you're seeing. And again, once the batten strips on the outside have been pulled off, you can see that there's quite a lot of gap between where water There's actually been some insect damage in some of these pieces as well. This gives you some idea on what's happening as they pull some of the interior finishes off. It's actually rather beautiful if you look at it that way. The middle photo are the inside surfaces of those railroad ties, and they have all the distressed places and pieces where the spikes had been drilled into them to hold the rails. It's really kind of beautiful when you look at it from this perspective, although it will be covered back up again once the interior finishes are reinstalled. But it really clearly shows sort of the authenticity with which this structure exists. The far wall on the right side, the guy's hand is unfortunately in the picture. Those horizontal 2x4s, the new ones that you see, have been nailed against the vertical railroad ties to basically keep them from just falling apart. If you see the little light that's coming underneath toward the bottom of that picture, that wall is not being supported by anything right now. It's just kind of hanging there. So the 2x4s laid horizontally are there to help keep that wall from collapsing. And as it says, to be continued. The project has been taking longer. We don't have a firm schedule right now on its completion. There is a meeting going on right now at the site with the structural consultant and D.W. Johnston and the representatives from Public Works in order to look at some alternative ways of dealing with the shear panels that have to be put into this project. Most of the shear panels will be going, as you know, on the inside of the railroad ties. In some of the areas where we thought there was standard 2x4 framing, and all we found were some very small furring strips, those areas will actually have shear panels built right into the walls as new construction, and then the board and batten siding will be reapplied to those surfaces. So as you also know, we've been, the city has contracted with a company to provide a video documentation of this project, and that's ongoing. There's a camera that's a time-lapse camera that's at the site that's capturing kind of a daily image, although not much has been happening in the last month or so because they've been contending with a lot of these existing conditions that they had not anticipated. Lastly, which you didn't see that's going to be happening next is those trailer jacks and the concrete blocks and sticks of wood and things that were holding the floor up will be removed, and there will be a series of concrete precast piers that will be set under the floor to hold the new floor structure up. And so hopefully in my next group of photos that I can bring you, I'll show you some of that stuff as well. That concludes my report.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
question to staff. How much damage has all of this rain done to the structure? And has it, I mean, I'm sure it set the timeline back, but has there been significant damage?
The rain didn't affect this building as much as it's affected some other buildings, in part because about 8 or 10 years ago, the city put a new roof on this building. So fortunately, we have a good roof. It's just the areas below the roof that are all falling apart and that the project is really working on. So the current rains did not substantially impact this particular project.
Thank you.
Yes, Todd.
So I have just something to throw out there to the board, and I don't know, I thought it was interesting to see that section of the wall before when they had taken the plaster off and had shown it, and I'm wondering if it's appropriate to maybe find a section of the wall and not put the plaster back on and cover it with plexi or something so people, I still, as much as we have talked about this, every time I see a picture, it's like, oh yeah, those are railroad ties. And I have studied this project and looked at that building, and I still, every time I see a picture, it's like, oh, wow. And so I'm assuming when people would walk through this, if you tell them, oh, this is made out of railroad ties, they'll go, huh? Whereas if there's a way, without compromising the integrity of the building and the restoration, to leave exposed even whatever a 3-foot piece of it with plexi, so when people go in, they could see how it's constructed. I don't know if it's possible, but just to throw that out there.
I can certainly talk with the consultants on that, sure. The thing is, when you look at it, it's as much like a log cabin. it's sort of that type of construction. It's like you build a log cabin, only they were railroad ties instead of logs.
Yes, Bill.
And staff. As the engineers and the building official noodled their way through the steel beams and shear panels and concrete foundations, please remind them that this building has stood for almost 100 years, even though there are air gaps and holes and nothing that is in the current code about holding a building up during a seismic event.
It's done pretty well for the last 100 years. Point well taken.
Any other comments? Yeah, it sounds like we got a good roof, but wobbly walls. For certain. I think it's a great idea Todd brings up, because what happens when something has been totally restored, we often forget about where we started. And this could be a good reference point, I think, going forward for us to have as a board, to be able to point to as an example. And I think the more examples that we can give people to understand, it serves two purposes, because also it gives them I think, encouragement, and it also gives them an idea that, okay, it really was some pretty dire circumstances, but there were ways to work within, what materials that they had. So I think it's two great examples. So I certainly applaud Todd mentioning that up and hoping that we can really get them to consider that.
And the building, when you realize that its rough year of construction around 1893, wood in the desert was scarce, and nails in the desert were scarce. Right. And so you're really looking at a structure that has a remarkable amount of ingenuity, as well as a degree of artistry, right, that even though they're building out of just some of the rawest of material, there's some architecture that was put into this building when they built it, and that aspect of it, I think, is quite an interesting piece of the story too.
Exactly. Okay, any other? Yep.
I just have a question in regard to when the museum reopens and the installation of the furniture. Is there going to be a little section about the preservation and the restoration of this project to educate the public about what everybody's just said about this very specialized construction and how great it was at that time?
Renee Brown, who's at the Historical Society, right, and we have talked about this, and part of the value of this video documentary that we're doing is, I think, going to be a really good way of telling that story. As the curator of the museum, Renee would be the person with whom we would want to talk about that with, and I suspect she's already having some ideas in that thought, because she's kind of watching it as well and amazed by some of the stuff.
Interesting story.
I'll mention it to her as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Ken, would this also be a part, it's a good question, Ken, of the video that PSPF has granted? Is this be a part of the whole documentary then?
I'm sorry?
Will the all of these photos that are being taken and the videos that are being taken incorporated with what Renee will be talking about? Is it going to be, let's see how I can ask this. So there's a video that's being made, right, as the progress. So will also Renee are we going to be able to take the images from that video also with talking through the project in some way? Are they two separate things?
Well, part of the video documentary is going to have interviews with key personages. So Renee, the structural engineer, the contractor, will be interviewed. And so there'll be narration as part of the video documentary.
Yeah.
And yes, I'm sure that there's going to be images, both stills from the videos as well as those that are being taken by both the contractor and the city, that can be used for display purposes. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's great, because I can see this becoming a major part of the 2020 annual event. Thinking forward.
I think that this house
That's a
is
great
going.
example, really.
Yeah, I think the project is unique enough that
Yeah.
it may even have a wider audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so any other comments on board on this? Okay, so moving on to 5C, the La Plaza Theater update. Are there any other information you have, Ken?
Just very briefly, I had a conversation with the facilities director, Stacy Schaefer. And with the Valentine's Day heavy rains that we had, the Plaza Theater did suffer a substantial amount of water damage. I only saw a few photos that Stacy shared with me, but they're in the process of pulling out carpet and pulling out, cosmetic surfaces, ceiling tiles and things like that. That got badly damaged. There were a series of what appears to be the roof conductors, or those drains that come down off the roof, that appear to have either have been broken or may have been plugged due to deferred maintenance over time. And there was one photo that I had seen in which the water was just bubbling out of the top of a roof drain, rather than going down the pipe.
Right.
There was water running out of light fixtures. There was water all over the floor. They're working really hard to get that building dried out as fast as they can right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just
Yes.
one other thing relative to the Plaza Theater. We do have the Plaza Theater on 2 tours coming up. We have it as part of the symposium tours. And then also at the California Preservation Foundation Conference in May, it will be the subject of a workshop as well. So I think both of those help to draw attention to the restoration project as we look for funding to restore the building. So putting it on display, I think, is helpful as part of that process. And with the recent damage that it sustained, it is hoped that we'll have it in a state so that we can bring individuals through the building to tour it in April and May.
Yeah, we have some major preservation projects happening in the city, which is really wonderful, and because 2 of them are city projects, city-owned projects as well. Any other comments or questions on that? Okay. Then moving forward to 5D, the Wellwood Mary Library Courtyard Restoration Status. Mr. Lyon?
Briefly, what I know on this one is that the Public Works brought this project back before the City Council at the meeting last week to seek additional funding for the redesign, to incorporate the recommendations and changes that came out of the Steve Kalon report, and to integrate some of the recommendations that this board subcommittee made to integrate into the project. So I don't know what the dollar amounts are, but I do know that at last week's City Council meeting, they did approve funding to bring new drawings together to integrate the recommendations that the board had made, including the central tree and the simplified landscaping and so on. So as soon as that contract work is done and the designer has completed the set of drawings, we'll have it prepared so that it can come back to the full board here for its certificate of appropriateness. I don't have a schedule for that at this time, though.
Okay. Linda?
Mr. Chair, do you know if the turtles were part of that report?
I don't.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Well, we'll eagerly await what's coming
Maybe
our
that would be
way
a funding
again.
opportunity or a donation opportunity if we get to that point, but no, I don't know.
Exactly. Okay. Moving on to 5E, then the Las Vegas Historic Sign Preservation Program. Mr. Fagg?
Mr. Chair, with our discussion last month on the cork and bottle, the issue of signage came up and sign preservation. And so I thought, just as a point of comparison, I would do a brief presentation this morning on the sign preservation program in Las Vegas, where I formerly worked. One of the unique things about Las Vegas is it's a little bit different than other communities. Having come there from some rather conservative communities that I worked for in the state of Florida, it was a little bit challenging to suddenly go to an environment where, instead of trying to cap signage and keep it minimal, as most communities do. In Vegas, they kind of have the opposite approach, where more is always better. And so it was a bit of a unique experience for me, trying to go from, keeping signage minimal to suddenly going to community where we were encouraging property owners to put more and brighter signage on their buildings. Another thing that I always have to preface any comments about is when I work for the city of Las Vegas, people often don't understand that the city of Las Vegas does not include most of the Strip. So whenever I'd tell people that, I'm the planning director for Vegas, they'd say, oh, did you do the Bellagio and the other hotels? And I'd have to apologize and say, no, unfortunately. As you can see here on the map, the green boundaries is the municipal boundaries of the city of Las Vegas. It takes in the central portion of the Las Vegas Valley and then the northwest quadrant. As you can see in the map on the right, the areas outside of the green is the Strip. The Wynn, Mirage, Venetian, Caesars, et cetera, are all in unincorporated Clark County. So there's a long story about a feud between the city council and the county commission and taxes and things like that I won't go into. But just to understand, we didn't actually take in what most people recognize as being part of Las Vegas. With that, we do have specific sign regulations in Las Vegas, and there are 3 sign overlay districts where they do encourage more and brighter signage. Those are the Downtown Casino District, our Entertainment District, which is just east of the downtown core, and then the Scenic Byway, which is along Las Vegas Boulevard. The center image that you see there shows the sign regulations for the Downtown Casino District. The blue portion of that is areas where we expect to see signage. And so that tells you, again, just the degree of signage that is not only encouraged, but to a certain degree required within those areas. There is a separate downtown design review committee that reviews and approves signage, and so they are more or less looking at the aesthetic qualities of the signage in compliance with the code, and in certain cases have encouraged more animation, more neon, and things like that in approving sign programs. Also unique to Las Vegas is Las Vegas Boulevard is designated as a scenic byway by the Federal Highway Administration. And different than nearly all other scenic byways, it's designated for its nighttime character. And so signage, and neon signage in particular, is a characteristic that we need to maintain in order to maintain our designation as a scenic byway. One of the things that opened up for us, being a scenic byway, is it made us eligible for grants that we were then able to apply back to sign preservation and restoration. And so, again, that's something that's kind of unique to Las Vegas. Unfortunately, Palm Springs would not be able to apply the same type of program here. In looking at really where most of the work of sign preservation occurs, it's through actually a private organization called the Neon Museum. It was formed back in 1996 as a joint partnership between the Allied Arts Council and the City of Las Vegas, but now exists as a separate and independent nonprofit organization. As part of that organization, you'll see that on their webpage, they say the history of Las Vegas through neon. And so that goes back to the importance of preservation, is preservation tells a story of a community. And in Las Vegas, its signage tells a story of a community. Like most historic preservation efforts, it started out with something that was lost. In this case, it was the loss of the Sands sign on Las Vegas Boulevard. That's really the impetus for the organization of the Neon Museum and its creation in 1996. Signage was also the way that it made its mark. Before it even had a formal museum space, it began with sign restoration, and one of those was the horse and rider sign from the Hacienda Casino. What they did was they raised money to restore the sign. I think it cost approximately $100,000 to restore that. And then they placed it on a pole in a median in Las Vegas Boulevard, and it's part of their scattered site collection, if you will, of restored neon signage. But that was the first thing that they brought to life. In terms of the Neon Museum itself, it now occupies a campus just north of downtown and is right on Las Vegas Boulevard. It consists of a lobby building, which is facing Las Vegas Boulevard. I'll talk a little bit more about that. It then has an outdoor display space called the Boneyard, which is highlighted in lavender there on the screen. Adjacent to it in the green is a city park, which is used by the Neon Museum organization. And then they just recently added, this was after I left, they added the North Gallery, which is also an outdoor gallery space shown in the pink there. And so that's its campus on North Las Vegas Boulevard. In terms of the lobby building itself, it's the former La Concha Motel lobby and was, interestingly enough, designed by Paul R. Williams and constructed in 1961. It was located on South Las Vegas Boulevard as part of the Strip, just south of the Riviera Hotel. The motel itself was demolished in 2004, and they then donated the lobby building to the Neon Museum. It took a little bit of fundraising, and that $800,000 grant that I talked about earlier was helpful in moving the building. They moved the building in 2006 and then finally had enough funds to restore it and open it and the Boneyard to the public in 2012. As part of moving it, it was kind of an interesting operation because there are freeway overpasses on all sides of the site. What they had to do was actually cut the building apart and then put it back together again. And I think the overall cost of that effort was about $600,000 to cut it, move it, and then reassemble it again. And so it was a rather expensive process, but what it allowed us to do was to preserve a piece of Paul R. Williams architecture. In terms of the Boneyard, the outdoor gallery that they have behind the lobby building, it's an outdoor space and it includes signage that has been donated to the museum. One of the most important relationships that the Neon Museum has is with private sign companies who have donated a lot of their old signage to the museum organization. One of the things that was a little bit disappointing to me is when they opened it to the public, I thought they would have restored the majority of the signage there in the Boneyard. Unfortunately, it's not. And so the vast majority of the signs in the Boneyard are not operational in terms of being functional with electricity. There's a few of them that are, but the majority of them are not, just because of the incredible cost that it takes to restore those signs. So if you go there, don't be disappointed that they're not illuminated. I had also mentioned that there is a public park immediately adjacent for use by the Neon Museum organization. This is a site that the city of Las Vegas was able to purchase through grant funds. We had a separate program that funds that were available from the sale of BLM land adjacent to Las Vegas was available for the use of construction of parks and trails and things like that. And so we used that funding program to buy the land and then to develop a park adjacent to this. The sign for the park itself consists of neon letters that were contributed by the Neon Museum, and so that forms the sign for the park. But again, it's something that the Neon Museum uses in addition to being available to the general public for some of the events that they do there. As I had mentioned earlier with the horse and rider sign, the Neon Museum also does sign restoration and has a number of signs in the Scenic Byway corridor. You can see the map on the left there that identifies those signs. As I had mentioned, there is a substantial cost to doing that. Some of the smaller signs have cost, I think, in the realm of about $50,000, but the larger ones like the horse and rider sign, the Binion's Horseshoe Casino sign, Silver Slipper, generally cost about $100,000 to $150,000 to restore those, illuminate those, and then install those in the median that runs down the center of the street. But that also contributes to the Scenic Byway and helps to bring recognition to the historic signs that we have. Talking a little bit about how the coordination works with signage, In 2004, Binion's Casino was bought by Harrah's, and they bought it primarily to acquire the rights to the name, the Horseshoe, and then also the World Series of Poker. After that, they then sold the casino to another organization. Since they had purchased the rights to the Horseshoe name, the new organization then had to come back and rebrand the property just as Binion's. And so with that, they went through our sign program approval process. And as part of a condition of approval, we included a condition that they donate the existing signage to the Neon Museum. And so that's one of the ways that that relationship works in terms of preserving signage. So if you go to the Boneyard, you'll see both the Binion's Horseshoe sign, and then on the left, you can see illuminated the interlocking H's. They have portions of that as well that's in the Boneyard there. And so that's one of the ways that you can do sign preservation, is as new signage is installed, to have an agreement with the Neon Museum to preserve it. Here's the disappointing part of my presentation to you, is there's actually very little signage that is designated as a, in our terminology, a Class 1 resource. One of the signs that is on the former Moulin Rouge Casino, which was a landmark casino when it was developed in 1955. What is significant about that, it was the first integrated casino in Las Vegas. And although it had a very short life, it was actually only operational for about 6 months during its heyday. The property lived on, and it was designated to our local register in 1992, and then later that year it was also placed on the National Register. But the sign itself is something that was part of the local designation, and unfortunately the building was demolished in 2010. But when the building was demolished, we entered into a contract with the Neon Museum to locate the Moulin Rouge signage there. And then the idea is that when the property is redeveloped at a later point in time, the signage will then be restored to the site. And so again, that's really the only sign that we have designated in the city of Las Vegas as a historic resource. Other properties that are not on the local register, but where signage is an important component of the architecture. One is the Hunt Ridge Theater, which was located in the Hunt Ridge subdivision, which was one of the first suburban subdivisions in the city of Las Vegas, developed in the early 1940s. The theater itself was constructed in 1944, and as you can see from both the architectural rendering and from how the building looks today, signage is an important characteristic of that building. And so even though the signage is not designated as a historic resource locally, it is an important part of the theater and is something that would be restored. Another property that I'm going to talk about, let's see, you're here, good, is the El Cortez Casino and Hotel. This was added to the National Register in 2012, and our own Mr. Maruzzi is the one who actually wrote the report for that. So, Peter, feel free to correct me.
You're doing a fine job.
In terms of the designation, the signage is not incorporated as part of the designation, but is mentioned in the report as being significant to the building. And so I don't know.
I hope that's wrong.
I didn't see in the report. So that's why I have you here today.
I hope that's wrong.
Because you do identify in the report that the roof-mounted signage and the gambling signage are both critical to its characteristics.
I thought it was designated as part of the overall.
The national?
But if I'm wrong, I'll be very sad.
Okay. But it's not on the local register. We haven't designated it locally in the city of Las Vegas. But here you can see that signage is an important characteristic of that building, and it incorporates the steel structure there on the roof that actually properties downtown have since incorporated. Newer properties have incorporated that same type of signage, which is reminiscent of the signage that was installed in the 30s and 40s in downtown Las Vegas. And so it's something that's being replicated to this day. But again, another important example of signage and architecture and how they work together.
Those streetlights in 41.
Yeah, it was a much smaller town back then. Just in terms of the preservation in Las Vegas, just a few things to think about. Number one is the importance of private preservation efforts in terms of the Neon Museum organization. Without that, we would not have the preservation program that we have currently in Las Vegas. What was also critical to that was the public and private partnership through the donation of land for the museum organization itself, the creation of the park adjacent to it, and then trying to be mindful as we have sign programs come through of donating that signage to the Neon Museum. Those are important aspects of that relationship. The other question that comes to mind is off-site preservation versus preserving in place. Signage is a little bit different than buildings in that signage is unique to a business, and businesses change. And so there's a need to be a little bit flexible in terms of changing out signage for that reason. But then there are other examples, as we looked at the Hunt Ridge Theater, for example, where signage is very much a part of the architecture and should be preserved in place. So that's an interesting discussion to have in terms of sign preservation efforts. And then finally, designation as a historic resource versus conservation of signage. And again, we have just one example of designation locally of signage as an object. But we have a lot of signage that's been preserved through conservation efforts, and those efforts being the Neon Museum organization. And so, again, just some things to think about in terms of signage and how we go about preserving signage. So that concludes my presentation to you. Happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Board?
I just wanted to make a comment that over the years I have visited the Neon Museum, and I went there when it was just this, beginnings museum and this small group, and have watched it grow and develop over many years. And I always enjoyed going to the Boneyard and seeing those poor, sad signs that were laying around. But then years later, they would move up front as they get the money to conserve them. Yeah. So it's amazing. That's, along with the Mob Museum, those are my favorite museums in Las Vegas. Thank you.
Linda?
The signage, is it from just the Las Vegas community, or is it from surrounding areas?
It's from valley-wide. And so it's,
Valley-wide.
not just signage in the city of Las Vegas, and that's one of the benefits of having the Neon Museum is they go beyond the city of Las Vegas. And so they are able to accept donations from properties in unincorporated Clark County, the major strip hotels. And if you'll notice in one of the pictures, let's see. Oh, here it is. In the right, you'll see the skeleton. That is the former Treasure Island sign when they rebranded in the mid-2000s. The Neon Museum received that part of their sign, their pylon sign.
Do you know what the budget, when you were there, what the yearly budget was for the Neon Museum?
I don't.
Because, I am fascinated that the public is so supportive of this. To raise $600,000 to move something really speaks volumes for the community.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it has some very important supporters, let me put it that way.
I think that's great. And my third comment is, for years, I've been trying to get the Parkview sign.
Yeah. Yes.
And so where do we stand with making certain that that particular sign is preserved? What do we need to do?
Yeah, there's a couple of different things that we could look at with that particular sign. One of the things that we could use is we could designate it as a historic resource because, again, we are allowed to designate objects, and a sign is considered an object. And so that's one opportunity that we have. The other opportunity is looking at private conservation efforts. Here in Palm Springs, I would say the first would probably be the preferable choice, just because it's what we have available to us right now.
Also, Linda, I've heard you mention before, I think it's Beckley's Motel.
Barclays,
signage?
on the way out of town.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
yeah.
That's another one that sign should definitely be preserved. Does the city have like an industrial building or something that they're not using that they might consider as a start. Back here.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the city yard, but I don't know how well that would be for signage, but
Well,
certainly
gotta
something.
start somewhere.
Exactly. Start small and then you can expand later.
Great presentation, thank you.
That was great, thank you. Love that.
We're now ready for board comments. So board, please bring your ideas, your thoughts to the table.
I have
Linda?
one comment, and that's grant writing for the La Plaza, the roof. Is our grant writer, I mean, that's a pretty important part of this town. And I know that we have a grant writer that has a lot on her plate. But I would think that because that piece of property is so significant to this town, that a grant for roofing, or just to start, would be important. Do we know if she's doing anything with the?
We no longer have a grant writer at the city.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yes, we are sorry as well. However, the city manager has indicated that we will be using a consultant to do grants for us, so we will still have that opportunity. On the roofing, we'll go ahead and coordinate with Marcus Fuller, Assistant City Manager, to make sure that we do preserve that structure. I think that's of prime importance, not only to you all as the Historic Site Preservation Board, but also to the City Council, and particularly Councilman Roberts, who serves on that subcommittee.
So did the city manager decide to eliminate that position, or did the council vote on it?
No, the individual, I believe, took a job elsewhere, and so that position has remained vacant. And I believe the instruction from City Council was to use a consultant in its place,
Instead of hiring
instead
someone?
of hiring a full-time staff person.
So we have X amount of dollars that we paid a staff employee. Does that include, I mean, I hope the dollars include the benefits and retirement package and everything. So if we were paying someone $10,000 and they had $20,000 worth of benefits, we actually have $30,000 to spend on it.
On the consultant to do grant writing.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, and grant writing is really gonna be important in this town as we move forward with La Plaza, so, okay. How do they select what grants this grant writer is going to write? Is it first come, first serve, or who decides what's important and what's not?
I would imagine the City Council and the City Manager.
Board comments, other members of the board?
I just have a question. So I recently saw the email regarding the California Preservation Annual Conference that's going to be held in
Yes.
Palm Springs here in May. So do we register for that individually?
I will talk about that under director comments.
Oh, good, oh, good, oh, okay.
And
Thank you,
I'll-
thank you.
Anyone else? If not, I have a couple of things. Vincent?
Well, I just have a comment about the Las Vegas Neon Museum. Some 20 years ago, I had a colleague in San Francisco. His name was Michael Crow. He was an Art Deco aficionado. And I remember vividly that he went to Las Vegas and worked with the city to help. That was the genesis of creating the Neon Museum.
Back in the day.
Do you know him, or did you know him?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was very keen on getting that started. My last visit there, we tried to go to the museum, but unfortunately it was closed. But you know, I've always wanted to see it.
Yeah, it's worth a trip.
Yeah.
I have a couple of comments. I've reported a couple of infractions to code enforcement, which is when we find something going on with one of the buildings that's been designated, is really the direction that we should go. And one is there's been a cut at the Town and Country Center in the wire that's been laced with a rope that's about the half of the size of your little finger. So reported that, and also the outline lighting of the Captor Plaza building. So those are two things that I reported, and it looks like with the orchid tree, Flynn, that they have made progress in putting up at least a lot of the fence. There's just, it's greatly improved from what it was. And there's this one section on the west side that's probably not as substantial as the others, but it certainly is a step in the right direction, which I'm really greatly appreciate. I assume then, I don't want to assume, that the cameras were also installed?
They're still working on the cameras. They do have some cameras in place. What's important is that they need to have live feed on those cameras, and so the police department is working with the property owner on that right now.
So that's moving along. That's really great news. So those are my comments. Yes, Dan.
Demolition has started on 401 West Morito Place, the parts that were non-contributing. And the site has been roped off, and it looks like construction will start pretty soon. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's been a long time in coming.
Mr. Lavoie.
And I'm very concerned. I went by a few days ago on one of our rare sunny days, and this historic resource is exposed to the rain, and has been for 4 weeks that I'm aware of. So whatever's left of this building won't be there probably in 3 months.
I think it would be the west side of the building particularly that's right.
It is the west side and the back, and
Yeah.
I don't remember, I wasn't here when that was reviewed. I'm concerned that if we are trying to preserve the primary street elevation of this building, that we haven't succeeded in doing that.
Right.
We'll reach out to the property owner and bring their concerns to their attention.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Staff comments.
So going to Board Member Huff's comments in terms of the California Preservation Foundation Conference, because the city is the host sponsor of the conference, we have been offered the opportunity to send our board and commission members to the conference for free. And so I sent out an email, and I apologize, Kathryn, if I didn't have you on that email. Okay. We will be able to sign up all of you who are interested in attending the conference for free. One of the things that is not included is any events, tours, or workshops. And if you go to the website, those are those events that are marked with a T, which requires a separate ticket. I'm assuming that California Preservation Foundation will indicate to me how we get you signed up if you want to do those things, but you will need to pay for those items separately from the general conference registration. But your general registration does get you into all sessions that are being held at the Hilton, and so please do take advantage of that. And I will submit your names to California Preservation Foundation to make sure that we get you all signed up. So I'm happy to do that.
Do we sign up in advance for the workshops that we're interested in, or do you just go and you walk in and?
You go and you walk in
Okay.
for the sessions
All right.
themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be a major event.
It is.
It's, I've been on all the steering committee meetings, and so is Todd, and it really is. It's shaping up to be a very, very high level, I think, of education that's going to happen here.
What's the date on that?
I'm
May
sorry?
8th through the 11th.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, so it's a very comprehensive conference. Okay, so any other staff comments? That's it? Okay, well,
I just want to mention that I'm moderating a panel with the planning director and the city attorney who worked on, or the consultant attorney who worked on the ordinance, and the consultant who did the survey. So there'll be a session at the conference about the host city's current preservation program.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so we're going to get some great press, I think, and attention out of this as well from the city standpoint. Well, it is with great pleasure that we made it through the first, thank you very much, everybody, for working with me through the first meeting. So I will
I
adjourn.
move that we adjourn to the meeting of April 9th, 2019.
I'll second it.
Second. We have a first and a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.